Welcome to our flexible workplace policy workshop. Um, Before I turn it over to Ryan, just wanting to note that this has been a long process with lots of involvement and engagement, and so the workshop is really to help us understand what we as an organization learned and what it means for us moving forward. There'll be kind of two pieces of the workshop. The first part will be talking about the engagement efforts and the survey and feedback and what we got from that. We'll stop at the end of that and with time for questions about that process. And then following that, we'll get into recommendations. What does that mean for us going forward? So there'll be more opportunities after the second section for additional questions and discussion. And I hope as you're listening to this, thinking through the big takeaways is how much work went into this engagement and policy development process. So listen for that in the first part. And then the proposed implementation recommendations. There are some, there would be changes based on that. So grounding in what we heard can really help inform those recommendations. With that, I'll turn it over to County Manager O'Connor.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. Good morning. I'll be joined today by Altricia Foster-Bento and Cassie Fitzgerald, who will be presenting. They've been a part of the team. We'll share a slide on that in a second. And so delighted to have them here. I'm pinch hitting in some ways for Director of Policy and Planning Elizabeth Tolsman today, who's off. And in the we pick each other up piece, it was let's keep going. Let's keep this moving. It's important with timelines. We're going to pull up the slides here as we go. I'm going to move quickly through some of these slides because we know we have a lot of them. We want to keep the focus on the discussion and what we've heard. As we turn to slide 4, and we talk about what flexible work looks like. In some ways, today is less about a policy presentation and more about what we've heard and the broad contours of where it's beginning to lead us. As we think about our work that has involved residents' first facilities dating back a number of years, and there are a significant number of points, in many ways for Ramsey County, COVID accelerated a path that had already started in Ramsey County. But it didn't just sort of accelerate it slammed on the accelerator. And since that time, we've been racing technologically and culturally to catch up. This is the first moment where I feel like we are not from behind playing catch up as much as we are now having an opportunity to look ahead and bring an organization along together. It's a huge change management moment. It's also a huge cultural opportunity for our organization. Slide 5 defines what flexible workplace development looks like. And there's been a working definition for the team you can read here. Transition and transform. I want to highlight a couple of words here. Residents first has to remain a priority. As we talk about employees, we also must talk about the work employees do to serve residents. That's an important piece here as we go forward. Alongside that, our values, ensuring a strong and inclusive workplace culture. You're gonna hear me use the word culture a lot today, and I think that's so important as we think about this. We set a culture every day in our organization, and we have in the past. Now is the time when we get to decide a little more than normal what that culture looks like as we move beyond COVID. Service delivery framework, strategic facilities plan, many other pieces. As we work today's workshop through, this is a hard workshop to build, and this is a significant effort with 4,000 employees. And I know it is for many other organizations too. What I want to say is a lot of organizations have taken this as a technical exercise of who's in, who's out, how many computers do you need, does it change your square footage? Those are all very important questions and questions we will get to. But we also started with a survey of our organization, which was long overdue anyway, and we asked 4,000 people, of which 2,000 responded. I mean, that survey response rate is incredible. They responded, and they took the survey and took the time to do it. I took the survey just to understand how long it would take you. It took 15 to 20 minutes. It asked all sorts of questions. I might have had a biased perspective, so hopefully they threw mine out. But in reality, it got to the idea of today provides an opportunity to pause and first hear from what employees told us and what some of those broad themes are, and then shape the broad contours of move forward. The biggest challenge in the short term is in one ear, we have many people saying, listen to the organization as you move forward and be thoughtful. On the other shoulder, in the other ear, are people saying, I want every specific detail laid out for the next 9 months today so I can plan everything accordingly. You cannot do those things at the same time at that moment. And so we're trying to do more concrete today, keep coming forward, more concrete. Learn as you go, adapt, more concrete. And that is truly the goal here of what flexible looks like, both in implementation immediately and in the go forward. The final thing I'll say on this as we go forward, as we move to the next slide, slide 6, and thanks to everybody for helping to pull that up. The survey today is going to give us this chance to hear, and Altricia and Cassie are really going to walk you through that part. But we also have to consider some other things that a survey alone does not do. We need to consider all of the town halls we've had over the last year. We need to consider the work with the Equity Action Circle. We need to consider our work with other community conversations that have occurred and realize that employee surveys are but one important tool of this process. And finally, the part that I believe, this is my own personal feeling, having been in the middle of all of it and working through it, and is an important consideration, I think, for the board, is we're putting this together. The part about how people define their individual experience of the last year comes through loud and clear. The conversation about the collective workplace you want to build and the organizational culture you want to sustain and grow does not come through as clearly. You have to do more inference and more pieces of judgment. People have strong opinions of how the last 18 months have or have not worked for them. But often it comes through that lens first, not a lens of what we are trying to do over the long term. And so how do you take what worked, learn from it, and then say, but that's not the end of the conversation, that's the start of where we might go. And that's hard, and that's part of why we're going to suggest as we go, we resurvey this place in about a year, and we continue to learn from what we've learned, and we keep talking to community, and we continue to learn from what we've learned. Slide 7 shows you the entire team who have been the core. This is like the Flex Workplace team. We meet every other week. The meetings will be continuing for, well, probably until 2022, as there's a lot going on here, both from a survey, policy, and implementation perspective. Slide 8, we're going to dive right into the survey findings, and so I want to turn it over here to our other two presenters, and I believe Altricia is going to go next.
Good morning, Madam Chair, Commissioners, and our County Manager. Thank you for having me here. As our County Manager mentioned in previous slides, that we did have a robust survey engagement across the county. We started meeting in March as a work group, and as we were trying to move into developing a more flexible or more permanent workplace model, we looked at methods to engage our Ramsey County staff, and one of those is, diving into a survey. We launched a survey in late May, and it ran for 3 weeks into June, and approximately 2,000 Ramsey County staff engaged in this survey. That was an amazing response rate, I think, approximately 50% of the Ramsey County staff. So this tells us that this issue was important to the Ramsey County staff. Approximately 50% of the individuals who responded were frontline staff. 26% of those individuals did not identify a class, but the interest came from Ramsey County frontline staff. So as we were developing our survey, it was important to identify key terminology as we were beginning to adapt a new nomenclature, I would say a more modernized nomenclature around what is flexible work, what that looks like. So we adopted flex work. Flex work is new, and it's a terminology that will be consistent, I think, throughout the presentation today. And it will be consistent going forward because our county manager said so. So flex work is defined by where a regular scheduler designating non-county facility or office where our staff will work from. And it was important for us to kind of delineate between flex work and mobile work, because sometimes people, they would cross-mingle or cross-define or use the same terminologies for the same thing. So mobile work, I would say, is where the employee's role requires them to work outside or to travel to sites to conduct their regular work duties. Next slide, please, Cassie. So as the team and I looked at the survey, almost 2,000 surveys, responses, approximately 94% of Ramsey County staff agreed that we needed to move towards a more permanent, flexible work environment. At the time of the survey, approximately 75% of the individuals who responded to the survey were working from home for more than 30 hours per work week. So these individuals who've had some experience over the year with just working from home. So just getting feedback from them and understanding what it was like for them, how different it has made work for them, how easier, how much harder, and how has it impacted our community. No, I need to go back. Oh, sorry. So also key from our survey is that at the time that approximately 70% of those who we engaged thought that flexible work to them they were okay with working 3 days out of the week, so 3 days at home and 2 days in a Ramsey County or designated workspace. 76% of them were open to drop-in spaces that the county would designate, and 78%, almost 80% of the staff we engaged believed that their quality of work had improved and they were able to provide a much better service to Ramsey County residents over the last year during the pandemic. Next slide. So one, I'd like to pause, like data not really shown here on our slides, is that overall for Ramsey County staff, they believe that the greatest barrier for them over the last year were issues surrounding technology, internet, and like the virtual components. So those, the largest barriers for the staff is components that are connected to technology and internet access, et cetera. So I think going forward, if we were to adopt such a policy, then we'd have to dive into improving that component, because that was the one that rose to the top. So what are some of the implications of a flexible work policy? So the benefits of a flexible work policy transcends not just a benefit to the employer, there are benefits to the employee as well, and then there's also some improvement to the services that we provide to our Ramsey County residents. So some of the benefits to the employer, our staff members indicated that they had greater productivity working from home. Their workplace morale had increased. This had some attraction and retention implications. Cost savings. You could save on office spaces, you're using less utilities, and of course, you'd be reducing your carbon footprint. The benefits to the Ramsey County employee, there is also a cost-saving component to this for the employee. They won't have to commute as much. They had cost reduction in terms of parking and even purchasing lunch, because the obvious thing is that they could eat lunch at home. The staff members were increased. They had an increased workplace satisfaction. They suggested that they had a greater work-life balance, and their stress level had decreased over the last year. And they were enjoying their flexibility and their autonomy of working from home. What would be some increased or improved services to our residents? The convenience for engagement of residents and clients, and better customer service due to the increased productivity and employee availability while working from home. I'm going to hand this over to Cassie, who will take.
Thanks, Altricia. Good morning, Madam Chair, Commissioners, County Manager O'Connor. So in addition to our countywide survey, we also facilitated 12 focus group discussions with over 250 staff across multiple service teams and departments. We targeted, as you can see listed here, labor representatives, frontline workers who, in FAS, Social Services and Workforce Solutions, who continue to deliver in-person services throughout the pandemic. We also focused on county departments such as Child Support, FAS, and Public Health that have had flexible work or telecommuting policies in place prior to the pandemic. We also spoke to advisory groups, service center navigators, and trusted messengers who could speak to resident access and impacts, as well as employee resource groups for racially and ethnically diverse staff. We engage these groups in order to capture specific feedback and go a little bit more in depth on what has and has not worked in the past, as well as challenges in serving residents and the potential equity impacts of previous and future policies. Next slide, please. So, although virtual service delivery, as Altricia mentioned, as well as online public meetings have enhanced access for many residents by no longer requiring folks to travel to county facilities in many cases. The increased reliance on technology also created some substantial barriers for others, we found. This is especially among non-English speakers, clients with disabilities, and those without internet access. So staff working with residents on a day-to-day basis also said that engagement had generally increased and described how connecting with clients remotely enhanced privacy, but also pointed out that many services lack electronic forms that are fillable online and other kinds of paperwork that still require kind of pen and ink signatures. So this necessitated continued mailing and in-person visits. We also received many comments from staff across departments about how poor internet connectivity, lack of at-home printing capabilities, and other technological challenges have caused work disruptions for employees. So related to this, we also heard about lack of ergonomic equipment, inadequate or uncomfortable workspaces, and distractions at home that have made remote work challenging for many of our employees. Next slide. However, the majority of our focus group participants, and I think this really came out in our survey, said that working from home has increased their productivity. Things cited include fewer distractions, time saved from no longer having to commute or travel to and from meetings, and increased flexibility. All of these things have allowed many employees to stay more focused and devote more of their time to getting work done. However, many miss informal interpersonal interactions and have found working together, brainstorming, and building connections difficult when most interactions with coworkers have to be scheduled as an online Teams meeting, for example. Many feel isolated, especially employees who started after the pandemic began and didn't have those previous in-person relationships to build on. And supervisors also shared some of the difficulties they've had managing their employees remotely, while some staff reported feeling micromanaged or ignored by their supervisor. Mental health, similarly, is kind of one of these two-sided coins. As we heard in the survey, I would say a majority of our focus group participants said their mental health has improved due to remote work. They have better morale, more satisfaction due to increased time with family or pets, and that increased flexibilities, while some others feel that working from home has blurred the lines between their personal and professional lives. And we had many discussions about difficulties disconnecting from work and stuff like that. Next slide. We also heard a lot of things that we've listed here under additional considerations. These in-depth conversations really span the gamut of all of the different things that flexible work touches. We've found that interests and needs vary by department. There were a lot of commonalities, but different needs as well. Residents, of course, need in-person services in addition to other methods. Important areas to be addressed in the future perhaps include establishing a work environment that considers technology, equipment, ergonomics, and opportunities for in-person team gatherings. Establishing a workplace that accommodates in-person meeting space and areas for storing files, materials, and equipment. Also, the facilitation of connections between colleagues as well as clients and communities that have both in-person and virtual options, as well as equitable guidelines for flexible work from home policies. We also got a lot of questions about parking, as well as, different commute options, potentially options for biking, public transit, other alternative forms of transportation, as well as I mentioned, ergonomics and equipment for remote work at home to perhaps make workspaces more comfortable and efficient, as well as technology, so the ability to print or have a Ramsey County cell phone or a better internet connection at home. Also, we'll need to keep accommodations for medical reasons under consideration, as well as our data privacy and confidentiality needs, which are very great, and also IRS implications with residency and what that means for where employees can live in state or out of state. And with that, I will turn it back over to County Manager O'Connor.
So, Madam Chair, we wanted to first thank you all, Tricia and Cassie. Great job. We wanted to pause here and take questions on employee feedback focus group survey before going into some of what it means and where it shapes.
I'll start with Commissioner McDonough.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. I'm going to go back to slide 10. In your last survey from the employee engagement findings, believe the quality of service to residents remained the same or improved compared to pre-pandemic service delivery. And then slide 11, your last one, has kind of a similar improved resident survey services. And I think that's, key. You recognize that up front. This is residents first driven, and it has to be. I just want to, this is coming from our employees and their perspective. Right? I want to make sure we're hearing from the folks that are coming to us for services and what the reality is, because that doesn't always align, right? Our employees may think it's actually improved for the folks they're serving, but the people that they're serving may actually think has not improved and it's become more difficult. And so how do we actually get that perspective from the residents and the individuals we're serving?
Madam Chair, Commissioner McDonough, I think that's a really good piece to highlight and one that we need to take forward as we go forward. And when we had the slide earlier of the employee survey in some ways does some things really well, and then two other considerations around culture and resident feedback saying it's less well, I think this is exactly why. So over the next year, we need to bring a focus to this specifically as we go forward. If all we are is more convenient for people who work here, but less useful to the people we're here to serve, that's a failure. The one thing I will add, though, the one positive, and I don't want to go too far down a quantitative angle, but when we've heard from the Navigator model and from our own self-assessments in the past, these numbers are better than previous assessments of our own org, which is a sign that even if it's a flawed method of measuring effectiveness, it's still, even in that method, apples to apples, people think we did a better job than we did before, and I do think there's a little bit of value in sharing that here.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Anything else to add?
Oh, no.
Great. Commissioner Mattis-Castillo.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I am looking at slide 11 when it talks about benefits for employees, and I'm surprised that I don't see a benefit about reduced childcare costs. Because I know, especially over the last year, I was home with my kids, homeschooling, as was Commissioner Nicole and Rhythm and others, and I saw lots of kiddos pop into Zoom screens, which was awesome because it was a way to get to know our staff in a different way as well. But I'm surprised, was that question asked? Did it come up? I would think that's a huge benefit.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Mattis-Castillo. It wasn't asked, that question wasn't asked, but her staff had the opportunity to, they had open-ended questions, so they were able, but we've only highlighted like the benefits that rose to the top in terms of, there might be 10 things, but I don't think childcare costs or reduction in childcare costs rose to the top of the things, the benefits that they highlighted as most important at the time.
Thanks.
Mr. McDonough had a
Yeah,
follow-up, and then
on this, because actually I think there's the tension here, right? I've seen workplace policies that require employees to still actually have childcare. So they stay focused in on the work and they aren't distracted by taking care of their children. I know it worked in a pandemic situation, or worked in maybe your two, spots as electeds, but employees that are, actually doing the work, having children in the house is because, like I said, I've seen policies that they actually require you to still make sure you are having childcare so that you can be assured that your focus is on the work when it's supposed to be on the work.
thank you, Commissioner McDonough. That was a policy at the state for their telecommuting
Yep.
pre-pandemic, and here.
Pre-pandemic, that was a Ramsey County policy. We've moved away from that, obviously, during the pandemic for reasons that are fully understandable. And I think as we consider what outcomes-based looks like, it needs to be a piece of our ongoing consideration. It's not front and center today in the conversation. I would just say, depending upon your job, how you're able to discharge your job and achieve outcomes may be impacted by that. And we need to be thoughtful on that as we move forward.
Thank you.
It's also possible that there may be added flexibility if you're choosing where your workplace is and expanding the pool of childcare options that may be available to you. For example, family childcare providers tend to be more affordable but have shorter hours because it's one person doing the work. So if you are doing drop-offs and commuting back and forth, it's much more challenging to find such a provider. So there may be benefits in that are harder to tease apart because of the pandemic. Commissioner McGuire.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I really appreciate the questions, especially Commissioner McDonough, when you asked, is this, this is from employees, how are the residents feeling? Are they feeling better served? And I'm going to the slide 15, where, productivity was up, as it says, increased flexibility and improved response rates. Was that just that's a focus group theme? Was that just what they felt that they thought, or do we actually have data that response rates were up? And I mean, they said, well, I was able to get back to more people quicker. I can see where you might feel that way, but do we actually have numbers that show that?
Madam Chair, Commissioner McGuire, yeah, so I would say that in these staff discussions, these focus group discussions, we did target, staff who work with residents on a day-to-day basis, whether they be service center navigators or otherwise. And although they did not have exact, precise data, I can tell you that one financial assistance services employee ballparked it at 70% increase in their productivity.
Wow.
Now, I don't know if that's true across the board. That's just one anecdotal comment that was not, I don't think they had the data to back this up.
Effective before, right?
They personally felt that their productivity had increased
It
at that level.
increased so much.
I don't have any better data than that. I will say a couple things, though.
Wow.
There's been waivers during
Yes.
COVID. Those impact productivity.
Oh, okay.
And we should continue to push at the state for those to become permanent, because productivity increases that lead to being able to better be responsive are good in good times and bad. Second, we didn't have a navigator model before this all started, and while that's still being fleshed out, that also leads to a better form potentially of response, and so we need to consider that alongside it. I think it means you move forward with both, quite frankly, would be where I would be. The third thing, from the complaint-based world that I often live in for these types of things, and that many of you live in, it is indisputable that there's been a change in a decrease in the number of people saying, like, I can't get this, I can't get that, I can't get this. Whether that is because of waivers or navigators or other things, there has been some change that you can feel in certain spots in this org, and I want to highlight that. And so employees saying this makes some sense. We should question what it meant for before. I actually don't want to leave that behind. The culture we used to have and what does that mean as we build forward is a big part of it too.
Thank you for
Commissioner
that.
Reinhardt and then Commissioner Gordon.
We definitely need to work, Madam Chair, if I could just say, we definitely need to work on increasing those waivers. I know Commissioner McDonough's been doing that at the statewide level, and we just, need to continue to push for all of these things. Thanks.
Thank you, because it's better outcomes for everybody. When we talk about residents first, it's not just the ease of getting it done, it's the ease of them getting the services that they need. And it's clearly working, so, yeah, I know that we're gonna continue to push for that. I was part of the pilot program a long time ago with the state of Minnesota, and in fact, that there were, I had to do reporting every day and basically account for everything, because they were trying to figure out, okay, how does this work? Does it improve productivity? And I did it 2 days a week. And so, and there were some people that were in the pilot program that were doing it all 5 days, and very seldom did they come into the office. I didn't think that that was going to work for me, and as far as the pilot program, I chose, or they asked me to do, what was comfortable for me, and that was 2, sometimes 3 days a week, depending on what the workload was. But it gave them a lot of really useful data. And it was I was happy to be part of the program that then decided how those guidelines would come forward. But the productivity increase was pretty amazing for those of us that were in the pilot program. But one of the rules was, and it was very clear, it was probably at the top of the list, this does not replace childcare. If you don't have childcare and you have children at home, then you can't participate in this. And now with COVID, that changed everything, and everybody understands that. I also noted at the time I had 2 cats, and I love in COVID seeing all the different animals and everything. All the things that just make us human beings. It's really, I think that's one of the reasons we have increased productivity, because we're seeing people as people, not just in the role they play. But yeah, trying to keep the cats out of the picture was really not an easy thing to do even back then. What did you say?
Did you ever see that? I'm sorry.
Okay.
There's a great YouTube video with an attorney and a judge and a cat.
Yes. Anyhow, and actually even when I was doing that study, there wasn't, I don't even know if there was a camera that was on. It was just the fact that I was trying to do the work, and yeah, they wanted attention, so I had to shut the doors to make sure they couldn't get in. But anyway, I think that we've learned a lot, and I think the other thing that we have learned in this is the trust in our employees. I know that early on we had from NACO. Primarily, there were discussions going on across the country, and listening to what others were saying. And I was struck by the fact that we were not talking about how do we prove, but how do we support. And, you can see productivity. It's not something that has to be monitored day in and day out. And if something isn't getting done, we know that. But the fact that we were in it together with our employees was very clear that that wasn't happening everywhere. And I'm just really proud of the fact that we were able to make that pivot and to do it in the best way possible. There were bumps along the road. There's no doubt there continue to be. But we're really working alongside our staff, and I think that's one of the reasons that we got so many people that responded. Because they really want to know. It's not just send out a survey, but they really want to know what we think. And so I guess as far as I'm also on I've got 11 and 13 on here, so I don't know, the implications for a flexible workplace. One thing that I'm glad that we have it on here, but I think it's really, in this time of climate change and issues, the reduction of the carbon footprint. I know we finally are including it here as a benefit, but my goodness, the difference that makes. And quite frankly, the fact that people are realizing that they can take transit. And that because if you don't need to have a parking spot every single day, you can take transit. And that also has a positive impact on the environment. And so I'm really trying to stress with folks that we really need to talk more about that, because again, it's where every single person has an impact on what happens to the future of our planet. And this was one of the positive things that came out of that. So finally, I guess I was heartened to hear that people felt less stress. Because I think when we first went into this, it was the fear of what was going to happen seemed so stressful that it didn't seem like it would ever get to the point where we could go, yeah, we can do this. But our staff, our county board, everyone said, okay, it's not, can we do this? It's like, we're going to do this. And trying to figure out how to do it the best way we can. So I'm glad, I mean, this conversation is one that we've been looking forward to for quite some time, so that we make the best decisions going into the future as well. But I'm really, to hear someone say, you know, in the middle of a pandemic, civil unrest, and to say I have less stress was kind of an oxymoron in some ways. But it was because, again, coming back to the respect and the trust that we have in our vision, mission, and goals, and in our staff to do that.
Thank you, Commissioner Reinhardt. Commissioner Cole.
Well, thank you. And after this discussion, I'm going to be watching out for that cat sitting policy. May come up. I am also very, very glad to see the themes that came out from the work groups in addition to the survey and the manner in which we were able to talk through the implications for a flexible workplace, the advantages, the potential disadvantages. And as we work to fail forward, you know, we know that continuing this work, observing not just the employee comments, but also our resident comments is extremely important so that we are able to understand the impact of the work that we did before COVID and the work that now, with more flexible workplace policies in place and likely continuing, we'll be able to do as judged by our residents as well as our employees. That will make all the difference in the world, and I look forward to the ongoing reporting. I want to ask a question about the observed barriers. I know that all of this will take time, but that as we look at the barriers for non-English speakers, clients with disabilities, those with limited access to technology, and the fact that in particular we don't have the plethora of electronic forms that we need in order to ensure the work can get done and responded to remotely. Are there any discussions about accelerating those, addressing those barriers and ensuring the electronic forms? What are the discussions like today?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Carter, two things. I don't think we could go back to the old work environment. We need to do those things
We
anyway.
do.
So I think I don't think what this tells us is how to move forward on things like accessibility, particularly language and ADA. We'll have a budget presentation to the board next week. I think as a part of that budget presentation, you're going to hear about movement forward and prioritized investments in both of those areas as a part of that budget presentation as we move forward. So what I would say is it's concurrent to this and not dependent upon where we end up as a flexible work environment. We need to meet that accessibility across the community.
And if I might, I do agree that those needs existed before, and that's why we're observing what we were doing then, what we're doing now, and how to enhance that work. I do think that the needs are accelerated by a more online implementation of services than in the past. And so I'm thankful we're going to continue to hear that, and I would hope that this gives us motivation, incentive, and ability to elevate all of that work, accelerate all of that work as is needed.
Thank you.
Oh, Commissioner Ortega.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question has to do maybe with the other side of the coin, and that is but we have on this survey employees that list all the benefits and even some of the downside. I also know some folks that said, boy, working from home is, I mean, I want to get back to the office. And that affects the mental health too. So my question really is, as we implement this, is this going to be a required? Is it going to be voluntary? Because there are some folks that have shared with me and said, I think I'm losing it. You know, staying home, I want to get back to work. So it's sort of the other side of the coin.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Ortega, am I the one saying that to you? I feel that day to day. There are times. I jest, but in the same way, I will say, since coming back with the board and spending more time in the office over preceding months, like you start to be reminded of things that you have to kind of wall off otherwise, and there's a good point there. So a couple of things to that. The survey itself was not only targeting employees who work flexibly, although I do believe you're going to have self-selection bias by people who want to weigh in based on that parameter. If you're someone in a full-time on-site role, they probably felt a little less urgency to want to fill this out, even though we did reach out to everyone to apply or fill it out. I was surprised at the 94% of employee support for more flexible environments. Not that I was expecting a majority. 94 out of 100 is a pretty wild number. The other thing is, I'll just say, I'll hold the rest till the implementation here on recommendations in just a second, because we're going to answer that next. So right after we finish this survey focus group piece, I'll dive directly into your other question about implementation.
And so I do have one question on the survey focus group piece on slide 9. Can you just explain a bit about the none of the above category? Because that's a big chunk of employees. Who might fall into that?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Fretham, the none of the above, I would say it was an option that was given to the staff, and they chose not to identify, so they chose none of the above, because there were categories that actually fit everyone, but to make it a more balanced survey and a survey question, we gave them the option to opt out if they wanted to.
Got it. Thank you. That's very helpful. And I'm guessing this might be covered in the recommendations section, so feel free to say that, and then we can move on if no one else has any other questions. Oh, Commissioner McDonough. So let me just ask this, and then I'll get to you, and then we'll potentially move on. It's more of a question about looking at some of those barriers that people raised up about work-life balance and management style, knowing that we were sort of pushed into this by COVID before we were maybe ready. I'm hoping that some of the recommendations might set up tools, resources, and training both for employees on how to navigate boundaries in that situation, as well as for supervisors and managers to help them be effective supervisors in a remote setting. I'm assuming we'll talk about that. Great. Then we'll get to Commissioner McDonough's question before we move on.
And thanks, Madam Chair, not a question, but I was going to save it to the end, but I just wanted to maybe validate something that Commissioner Ortega brought up, and I got to find it, but I think this was coming from the St. Paul Chamber. One of the biggest surprises they were monitoring, as especially private businesses were making decisions about this. The biggest movement in employees were employees moving from businesses that told them they were staying home to work and moving to businesses that allowed them to come to work, which was a surprise because they thought more people would move from companies that were having people come back to work and not giving them the option, trying to find a company where they could. And that was, and I'll try to find that data because that was a really kind of eye-opening data that employees were kind of telling you, to Raphael's point, they really wanted to be in an environment where they felt they were a part of a team and not being told that, you know, you're going to be isolated at home.
Great. I'll let you respond to that and then move on.
No, Madam Chair, Commissioner McDonough, we're going to take that one head on here too. So maybe I'll start as we dive into the recommendations on 19. I'm going to break my own rule, and I'm going to start with what the recommendations aren't, which is a terrible marketing strategy, but kind of important as we dive through these. Or a few other considerations. First of all, We have had a department-by-department approach to telecommuting or remote work in the past, as was mentioned by Cassie and Altricia during the focus group pieces. We specifically reached out to areas to learn from what's gone well and not, and that's pre-pandemic. This is an attempt to move out of a department-by-department implementation approach to what our work environment as an organization looks like. And that's tricky because we have departments saying we have special needs. We need to make space for that. We understand that. But we also know if you leave it fully up to departments, you will end up with different environments and you'll have 20 different units in this organization about how we value or don't value flex work and the comments that others have made around this table. We want to start with an expectation setting at a very high level and then allow for implementation specifics to be a part of where we go going forward. This is not going to be a proposal that proposes full-time off-site work for a majority of Ramsey County employees. Let me just say that one more time because it comes up all the time and not everybody likes this answer and they ask a lot. This is not a proposal to move to full-time off-site work for a majority of Ramsey County employees. This is the spot that I receive the most criticism about day to day as we go through from employees who would like the opportunity to never have to come into an office environment unless called into it. I have a couple of things I'll just say to that as we've worked our way through this. One, some people earnestly they very much value that environment. And I can respect that and I can understand that. And I'm not actually here to challenge that on an individual basis. However, we come to work and benefit one another as much as ourselves, and that part of it gets left off. It actually goes a little bit to the mask conversation we had earlier. We have to both consider the individual, but the individual's contributions to the collective. And we have other employees saying, I value greatly the opportunity to see others in the office, not I value greatly coming to an empty office on my own. And I think that's an important part of this, that together we build a place and a thing. And while some days we may not want to be a part of a collective and we just want to retreat to our own spaces, that's probably not the ideal outcome that I would submit to you in these recommendations is where we want to be. And then finally, in the idea of working from home, it often, or working off-site remotely all the time, there's a piece that says, well, you won't be able to attract talent from everywhere as a part of the work. And that's true. If you live in Myanmar and you wanted to apply for a job here then and you can't meet the requirements, you wouldn't be able to work here. I don't dispute that. That is a spot where we should be openly paying attention to what it does around talent attraction, retention, and promotion. However, as an organization, I would submit to you we're doing well in talent attraction, retention, and promotion. Evidence A and B of two leaders here presenting before the board today. And as a part of that, what I would say is we want people who are community focused, who care about this place from both this is where we live and operate as well as where we work. And it's not to criticize organizations that make different choices, it's just to say I don't think we start from the idea that we are at some level of desperation where we have to create an environment where you could work from anywhere. And I want to say those up front because these are really serious conversations we're having. There's no one answer on any of it. I think we're all doing the best we can to chart a path of expectations and culture. So as we go into these, here's a few recommendation pieces. We want to support a hybrid model of service delivery. We want to keep virtual options. We've talked about the virtual navigator environment as a part of our enterprise services plan. You can come in a door, you can come in on a phone, you can come in person. All of that needs to be a part of our future together. We want to leverage available technology. I think we've used technology on almost every slide today, and we know that. We have work to continue to do there. The fillable forms thing has been an issue since the beginning of the pandemic. That has stood out to me as something that departments identify as barriers. It's not always our barrier, but sometimes it is. And even if it's not our barrier at the beginning, we need to work to change it so it's not a barrier. We need to create spaces where employees interact with and work alongside their teams on a regular basis. And I want to highlight why. Reduce isolation, improve morale, encourage professional growth, foster team building. One of the biggest reasons some employees cited for wanting to stay away from the office is they didn't like the culture that used to exist in their office place. I want to both acknowledge that and own that right up front and say we have to work on that, while also saying avoidance is not a culture building strategy. And that's an important dynamic to acknowledge here because that means we have to say up front, we're not going to tolerate bad culture and climate, but we're also just not going to avoid it because I think of the logical conclusion of, so what happens when y'all get called in for an all-staff meeting? That's a pretty rough environment to then go into because no one really wants to be there. So we need to work through that. Slide 20 on continuing the recommendations. We've talked about this. Let's remain flexible beyond the initial implementation period. Listen, learn, adapt. And the proposal here is that we'd like to resurvey the organization around the end of, I skipped a slide, maybe. I'm on 21, I'm sorry. So establish clear barriers between work and personal time. This is a huge issue. And as commissioners I actually know you understand this because of the hours that we talk to each other and interact. This is a spot where I don't have specifics today on the how. I would really like to work with this board to think through the how we specifically get tighter here, because I'm worried about the long-term health and well-being of employees based on the hours we're getting stuff, based on the number of hours people are putting in that we see logged. We can do good work and still sleep and make sure we have lives outside of here a little bit. During a pandemic is not really the right time to figure that out the whole way, but at some point this winter and beyond, I want to highlight that this is a very real issue. Ongoing training and support, both for staff and also for managers. This has come up a lot through the process of what are the expectations? How do you make sure we all understand what the goals are here? How do we know what the rules are? I don't want to get dinged for trying to do a good job, all of that. The disparities piece here on addressing disparities, I think about it on two levels. The employee disparity of, more senior employees are often afforded more flexibility than those in other roles in the organization. And from an equity perspective, we really got to think about that. And who benefits from these policies is a part of our consideration going forward, and modeling the behavior at all levels that we wish to see through the organization. But the other disparity is that departmental disparity. Depending upon your department, you may or may not have been afforded flexibility that looks different. And we want to move away from that being a key determinant here. As I previewed slide 21 for you already, we want to remain flexible beyond the initial period and then resurvey the organization around the end of 2022. I don't know how else you keep hearing from the org, and what I would put alongside the resurvey is, Commissioner McDonough raised it, but we've all talked about it here, focused efforts to get community voice in as a part of that timeline, so you're running cross-currently what's working and what's not. I submit to you, we'll work on more levels than not, but we won't get them all right, because that's just not how these things usually work. So as we move into 22, these are the slides that are sometimes the hardest, because now we're going to get serious about what does it all mean, right? And where do we start? There will be 3 designations of employment status within the county going forward, in terms of how you might be looked at in terms of your job and what the duties you do. The first is full-time on-site. And you can see an illustrative list here of these. These are not meant to be an exhaustive nor perfect list. And I would highlight corrections is a great illustrative example of some of it would fit in here, but not all of it. It depends on what role we're talking about. We've had probation officers working in mobile settings throughout the pandemic and in different ways, so it's not everywhere. Okay, so this list, we're going to designate through a process by which service teams will work with their departments. They're going to propose a list of these are the job duties in these areas that are being designated full-time on-site. Shouldn't actually be that hard to build this list, because they probably are all at work today. They've been at work through the pandemic, and I want to say thank you to them for showing up through this pandemic and being a part of our response. That's the first designation here. It's a pretty straightforward piece. I'll pause on that if there's any. Okay.
Oh, can I, Madam Chair? About what percentage, do you have any idea, would fall in this category?
I look forward to coming back in a month
Yes.
and giving you these, because
Okay,
I honestly
Yeah.
don't know. I don't mean to be
Yeah.
flippant. This will be a
No.
really good exercise for us to go through and understand. I think
Great.
it's 25% of your organization, and you can now have it on a recording, and we'll see how far off I am by that guess.
Thank you.
Slide 23 shows the designations then. So we're going to go from one extreme to the other first, and then we're going to come back to the share in the middle. Community-based or mobile workers. These are things like embedded financial workers, property tax assessors, public health nurses. They didn't really have a space on site generally before the pandemic. It doesn't make sense to try to overfit certain positions into space going forward. That's not to say they're never on site, but it really is a discharge of your duties is in the field in many different settings. So we're going to start with the list of designating here the full-time on-site. Concurrently, we're actually going to be doing a second list to sign off on what are the jobs that are community-based mobile. For all the dialogue we had about the give and tug where some people want to be full remote, this is where the challenge will come in, is I think we will get some submissions of my position or these positions should be full-time mobile work. And I think there'll be a little bit of, do we agree or not agree on those? I don't know until I see it and we have to sign off on it, but that's over the next month. So your question, Commissioner McGuire, by the end of the next month, the goal is to identify all of one and all of two, which gives you a general scope of the rest of the org and what we're talking about. Now for what will be the biggest group on slide 24. There's an A and a B within your third designation then. So you're not one, you're not full-time on site, you're not identified as a community-based mobile worker. You would be an employee that's eligible for flex work. And there are two environments, and it's going to be an employee designated, they select their designation. I think of this in terms of on an annual basis, we select our healthcare. I think on an annual basis, you'll have an opportunity to select your work environment setting. There's always the part of if it's not working for you and you have to work with your supervisor, changes happen midstream, that just needs to be a part of how it all works out. I don't have all those details yet. You can opt to either be a primary on-site worker. So for the individuals that got cited through the focus groups that Cassie referenced, that said, I don't have a good site at home to work at. It's crammed, it doesn't work for me. I want to be on site like every day. That's what I would like to do. That's an opt-in you can do, and we will set up your work accommodations accordingly. Based on the survey results, I anticipate that being a relatively small share of employees, but more than zero. I think there will be employees who opt into that. The second is the hybrid approach. And you can see here, that would be an employee who opts into being in a hybrid environment to discharge duties. It would involve approximately an equal mix of on-site work and no defined location work. Flex work, as it was defined on the earlier slide. And we're gonna work to balance this as we go. The encouragement to leadership and departments as a whole will be to think about the ways to leverage collective moments in the office together. Schedule meetings, schedule the things that you can do together in person better. It leaves the opportunity to do the other types of work where you see the benefits coming through in these surveys to be done during days when you're not in the office. So hopefully you don't have to go Zoom, 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 Zoom all day long. The goal is actually to do less of that than we are currently doing to create better delineations between collective work that can only be accomplished in person and more of those tasks that need time to get processed. That is our biggest struggle I see right now, is that like when you run from thing to thing, there is no time to get the things done to continue to move the work forward. And that becomes your evenings and nights and weekends and mornings, and I know I'm not alone in that. So moving beyond employee designation on slide 25, there's a few other pieces of guidance here I want to reference. Leadership accessibility will matter. This would propose consistent expectations for leaders with approaches to schedules that ensure in-person and tech access for all employees. The goal is to generally have departments in together as much as possible here as we go forward. So there's those opportunities to fit. And then we actually want to go farther and think about where are the other areas of the org that should be in with you from proximity and perspective. Like some of that's not fully fleshed out yet. But leaders have to think about their schedule, and it may have to stagger across the 2 to 3 day a week in out that everyone else has. Because one of the things we also have heard locally and across broader scholarship research is access to leaders matters, and more than on a scheduled basis. Who leaders see, who they talk to, who they support, their day-to-day interaction shapes people's careers. And I do think sometimes that gets underappreciated to the degree to which those things matter, and we've probably all had experiences in our own life that would support that in different ways, where sometimes people see you before you see you in terms of what you might want to do, and it takes those teams is not the way to foster that environment. Employee training, we talked about. Supervisors also need support and resources here. It's a two-way street where we're going to work together as we move ahead. There's going to be a three-phased approach piece we go to next, but let me pause on the designations of employees and the additional guidance items for a minute, Madam Chair, and see if there's any questions or discussion that I can help with here first.
Commissioner Reinhardt?
Well, I appreciate the approach, and having read through this a little bit before today, there's no surprises here, but I really think that for those that are the ones that get to choose and how that works within their team and to get the work done, I think is probably going to be the trickiest part of this, because situations change. As I said, when I was part of the pilot program, and if they had asked me to do it 5 days a week, I would have said, no, I'm not. But it worked, and one of the reasons for doing that with other employees there was to find out what impact does this have. Now, and so I think that, again, I think it's in many ways just trusting people to figure out what is going to work best for the entire team. And the manager or supervisors within those teams does make a difference, and how they accept that. And so this is going to be the trickiest part, and I'm glad that you're really looking at this. I can tell you that I still remember that during the time they were doing the pilot project, I switched supervisors. And the second supervisor hated the fact that I wasn't there for those 2 days. And it made it very difficult. And it was finally, someone said, well, we actually met, and I said, well, am I not getting the work done? What is the issue? And he said, no, you're getting more work done than you did before, because I didn't have all of the interruptions and different things. And it just, that's the productivity in the log that I had to keep showed that. And so I do think that this is going to be a different role for those that are supervising as well. And he came around because he finally, realized, hey, this is, something that is coming. He maybe didn't like it, but but it wasn't about an individual. It was about how you do this as a team, and keeping me part of that team, which was important to me as well. So I think, again, this is going to be such a complicated in many ways to implement this, because sometimes people may want to do something that is not going to work the best for the residents either. So I don't know that I'm really helping you a whole lot by saying this is going to be really hard, but recognizing that and knowing that that the employees, I think the most important message in all of this is that you are valued. As part of this organization, you are valued. And that's why we're taking the time to not just do a cookie cutter. So for those that are listening right now, we really want to make it work the best for them in the services that they provide, so that we can all be proud of the end result that we have for, again, our goals: prosperity, opportunity, well-being for all.
Commissioner McGuire.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and just thank you, County Manager and everyone for working on this very complicated issue. And I'm just going to affirm or clarify that this is a process of learning right now. So if an employee works for a department where they say, well, I want to be flex, and they're saying, no, you have to be one of those that has to come in every day, that's going to have to be worked out within that department. And because we have this option of a flex policy, they're going to have to figure out what that position is, or that person's going to have to find another position. Or I'm just thinking of these situations.
Madam Chair, Commissioner McGuire, the county manager has to sign off on the designations of the jobs that are defined as full-time on-site. So it's not up to like individual, and I won't do that based on, well, I don't want to manage people off-site. Right. It needs to be based on service delivery reasons and discharge of duties. Right. And once those are defined, that employee is not a flex employee with the option then. This job has been defined by Ramsey County as an on-site, full-time, in-person position. And and now it's on us to not like overuse the designation in places that we shouldn't, or we would face an issue. I also don't get the feeling that people who come to work every day currently, they have not been calling in saying, I have been misdefined by the organization. Yeah. Most of them are doing great work and show up every day doing that, and they know it's a part of the job.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that.
Commissioner McDonough?
Thanks, Madam Chair. As we get ready to kind of move into the next phase of your presentation here, I guess my comments are to approach this with a lot of caution, and I'm actually maybe even a little bit cynical. This isn't new. Business and government have done this and tried this in the past, and for the most part, they've always had to walk it back, because it just hasn't worked in the way that actually meets the needs of their clients, whether it's business or not. I can remember we actually got a presentation from Hennepin County a few years ago at Futures, because they got really liberal and aggressive, and they had to pull it all back because it just wasn't working. And I just want, I think in some ways, everybody that was working from home or from outside in this situation was forced to do it in a pandemic, right? Yeah. It was this collective trigger that pushed everybody to potentially step up and be a part of the problem solving and the solution in a way that, in the past, that wasn't a part of it, right? And as this settles in, I just want to make sure we're being cautious about it, and we really need to focus in that this is benefiting our residents. This isn't, absolutely, employee morale is a part of it, but on both sides of this, right? I mean, Victoria shared how, employee morale can be affected on the other way when people aren't able to interconnect, right? And so staying focused in on the results and the outcomes, I think, is just going to be critical. But I think we also have to recognize the success of this over the last 18 months could be potentially more driven by the fact that there was this collective will, because we're a part of a shared experience, a pandemic, versus this ongoing operational structure that we're going to try to put in place now based off of that may not produce the same results. And we need to be, we use it a lot now because you pulled us into this, fail forward or fail fast, because it's going to be hard to pull back. It's always hard to pull back something once somebody's been given something that they feel has value to them, and then it doesn't have value to the organization, and we need to pull it back.
Madam Chair, Commissioner McDonough, I appreciate all the comments, and I think we're all trying to do our best, and the nuance matters, right? And this is this is an illustrative example from people who have also been working and experiencing a lot of what employees have about what might work and might not. Part of the reason the not full-time off-site work is here is because of past failures of other organizations well beyond a county, and to the idea of you lose your culture real fast, I think. And there are people who disagree with that, but I have two brothers I'll speak to who both are remote workers, don't even live in the same state as their organizations, and they discharge their duties on behalf of those organizations. But if another organization wants to call and have a conversation, well, what's the difference? I mean, at some level, like, this is the arrangement we've set up and worked in. We don't want that environment here. And staying cognizant of it is important. I'm a little more optimistic in certain spots maybe than some of where you framed it, but reasonable people can like muddy through together, and I appreciate the thought.
Thank you. Commissioner Mattis-Castillo.
Yeah, similar to Jim, I guess I'm a little more optimistic because in those other scenarios, it was like attempt, right? But here, like universally, the country tried this. And so people have a different expectation. And so I guess I'm a little bit more optimistic. And I'll even say, as you talked about surveying our employees a year from now, but I actually think it should be about 30 days after some of them return to the office. And the reason I say that, and not to add workload, but I was one of those that was eager to get back to work. I want to be in person. And now I'm like, I enjoy coming here on Tuesdays, but I actually prefer my meetings at home. And I didn't think I would ever be that person because I personally am far more productive. I feel a better work-life balance. And I actually like that I didn't have to have childcare because I got to engage with my kids without guilt of being at work. It didn't cost me more money, and I was more productive simultaneously. And so in my caution of setting, as we figure this out over the next few phases, I don't want us to also put in policies that we think are right, like the mandatory childcare. Totally disagree with mandatory childcare. I think that we have to set up qualitative measures for people working at home, and we teach them about how to do work-life balance, but not enforce work-life balance, right? So Commissioner Reinhardt is a great example of someone who emails at 2 a.m, and but that's because that's her balance, right? That's when she wants to sit down and do her emails. And then we all need to know, I'm not responding at 2 a.m., and she has the expectation that I'll respond when I get up, right? And so I think it's more about education and training and trusting our employees, and then letting to see the benefit. And again, we still have to have measures, of course. We don't want people taking advantage of the system and not working, but for those who have the opportunity, I think about like kids who get sick, and we all have to take sick days, and sometimes they're sleeping the whole time, and so we can get work done. And to have mandatory daycare for that reason seems silly. Or if they're children who are, mine are 11 and 13 and relatively functional, I shouldn't have to have mandatory childcare. And so I just think about that for our employees and the number of, we have a large number of employees who are parents. We have a large number of employees who are mothers that have that role of childcare, but we could actually get more women in particular into the workforce who say, I have to stay out because childcare is not affordable. And they could come work and do great work for Ramsey County if we have this opportunity to say, we have a work from home model. I mean, bus drivers are doing it, right? Now, if you go out to the bus seat, it says, bring your kid to work, pop them in the car seat and drive a school bus. They're desperate for drivers, right? And to think about what we can do here at Ramsey County, I think we have opportunity. So I don't want us to rush to make things to correct problems, but to really do this in an opportunity and engagement, and to think about that holistically, because I think there's a really big opportunity here.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Modis-Castillo, just a couple of pieces that I appreciate the thoughts. Just one of the clarifying things maybe is in the expectation settings of our environment at the beginning, it can't just be about employees, it's the service delivery environment you want to foster. Mm-hmm. And then employees are an important dynamic to that must be an important part of this, but I just want to say that out loud. I think that's like an important, it's not an either or, and I think we're past where it has to be an either or, it's a big deal. And on some of those specifics, they're not all here. I'm not going to take you up on a 30-day countywide survey because I would probably cry and these two might not be back. But I will say this, the phased approach we're going to lay out is the idea that every 30 to 60 days we learn before you jump to the next. And it will get, I think, based on the areas we pick, progressively in some ways more difficult because you start with areas where you want to really be bullish and lead the way out. And by the end, it's the spots that are going to probably bring some of these tensions most to the fore. And your idea is you've learned over 4 months or so before you dive into that space. So maybe it's more of an informal way of taking feedback, but we will need to accommodate that as we go.
Great, thank you. Ortega?
Thank you, Madam Chair. My comments in a way sort of incorporates what was said in the last 5 minutes. As we get our results, we should implement very slowly. In other words, let's not say, here are the results and we'll take a vote in 2 weeks. I think we need to probably test after because even with our surveys, even if you take a survey 6 months or a year from now, it all depends on the composition of those people responding, right? When you do polling or marketing, you just don't do it in June and say it's good for a year. You're constantly doing it because so I'm just saying let's be cautious about this and implement it because as Jim stated, it's hard to go back. And so we need to make sure that, and I am constantly surprised, and I'm talking about the younger generation, as I get feedback, how many folks are not, even with kids and everything else, are not crazy to work from home. And we made all these assumptions. I mean, during last year, everybody, whether it's business or government, the world's going to change. Nobody's going to go back. Everybody wants to stay and work from home. We don't need as much transit. We don't need much office footprint. I mean, on it went. I don't know that any of that is true. And we need to make sure we have enough time to make the right observations of what's happening in our society.
Thank you.
Commissioner Reinhardt?
Well, and I think I just want to say that I agree with the statements here. And I don't think that, especially when it comes to childcare, I mean, that was something that was put in place because there were folks that were looking at it and saying, well, I don't have to pay for childcare, so I'll work from home. And that wasn't about the service delivery. That was about, and yes, it has an impact on the pocketbook. But I think what I'm hearing is that it's about the service delivery and how that happens. And it's also about the individuals and the fulfillment that they get from the job, because we know that, yes, you work in order to financially have what you need for your family, but when you look at job satisfaction, that's just one factor. And so the mental health side of this, the interaction, it's always a balance. And so I just, again, appreciate the fact that going into this, there's a lot of flexibility in trying to figure out what really works here. And having these different categories, I think, is a huge step forward, because it's not just let's look at the whole universe and say, how can everybody do this or that? There are some that are designated flex that we can work through those. There are some that are designated on site, and how that goes forward. So I think that will streamline it a little bit, and then people have some choices there. But it is, it has changed, but it's not. I also don't believe that when you're forced to do something, that somehow that's what you'll end up wanting to do. It really depends on how productive you feel and how you value it. And I valued back then and now the interaction, the personal interaction. And my husband, who's Italian, oh my God. Him being not an introvert, an extrovert, it was really hard. Depending on what your personality is, it's really hard. Because you want to have that human interaction, no matter who you are.
Madam Chair, I was wondering if I could fly through the three-phased approach slides, then we can be at the end, because some of these questions that result around learning and flexibility, but I'll pause.
Do you need to wait till after?
I absolutely can.
I'll go very quickly through these three. Appreciating the nuance, and this has been why it's hard to have the workshop today and think through how to do this stuff coming forward. I would submit to you this is the largest public sector survey in Minnesota right now around workforce needs and what we're trying to do and the way we're trying to deliberatively approach that work. And so I thank you for being a part of it. Three-phased approach here on the implementation side. You don't want to try and roll it all out in one fell swoop right away. And again, at least 30, hopefully 60-day notice to employees here as we go forward. One of the biggest things that comes up is people want expectations and clarity. They want expectations and clarity. Tell me how it's going to work. And then if they don't like the answer, then they say, well, tell me again how it's going to work. But in reality, they do want this. And this is something that I feel we owe to the workforce to come back, because whether we want to acknowledge it or not, we're already kind of stuck in what the last 18 months has done. And now we need to move to what our future needs to look like. There's already this thing that's taken hold across organizations. Slide 27, if you could go there, is phase one. These are the initial areas for implementation. That'll include, so the easy ones to designate, anything designated as on-site full-time, that'll be designated in phase one. That'll be implementing right then. Same with the mobile remote or community embedded mobile pieces. Those are the designations. Those will be part of phase one. In addition to departments where you're going to see more flex employees come through as a part of this then. County manager's office, I've been talking to the chair, the county board office too, and that transition back to full functionality. Other employees operating in the courthouse, finance department, HR department. We want to lead with some areas and learn before we ask others to do and take things on. We want to see what works, what doesn't work, and what the challenges look like. We're targeting November 1st for implementation since Delta has slowed us down. That's our goal right now, to move forward on that timeline. And I wanted to add to that no later than by the end of 21. I am confident in our vaccine strategies that we can get this moving and continue forward. I do feel a need to take steps forward. I'll just submit that to you, because the longer we stay without a plan, that's challenging for us going forward. But if we're in high or substantial, it's just, you can't put a bunch of people inside. And so we need to be recognizing that CDC designation is going to matter. And if we move forward, we'll go back into a step back moment, but not moving away from the approach of implementation. It's just until we come back down, we are in X environment until the day after when you hit moderate again. Phase two, then on slide 28, is going to be other units that we're going to identify here over the next month. So I don't have them specifically identified. It'll be a little easier once we get those tier 1 and 2 employee designations done to think of kind of department by department. I would like to work with senior leaders here to really think this through. They have important thoughts on it too. It's either a month after phase 1 or 2 months. And that gives you that time that you've talked about here around learn and grow. And then phase 3 is a mirror of phase 2. It's the rest of the org, with the entire organization to be operating in a new environment following the implementation of phase 3. There's a lot here, and so we can go to final questions, discussion, thoughts, and comments. I appreciate the nuance and the degree of thought that the board is sharing here today and putting in. I don't want to make any of it sound like it's easy or clear-cut, and yet at the same time, I think employees have continued to find ways to step up and engage here, and I think the residents first ethos that has taken hold in the organization is real, and this is a chance to enforce that all the way through what we become post-pandemic as an organization, and I'm really excited about the opportunity to be with Ramsey County at this time.
I'll start with Commissioner Carter and then Mattis Castillo.
Well, thank you. It's been a really good presentation of the survey and the focus groups, the recommendations, and I want to appreciate all of the work that has been carefully done during pandemic and before. You know, as we have been preparing for our mobile workplace policies of the future all along. I just wanted to say that given 2 of those categories or designations already pretty predetermined, and that middle ground is an area, it seems to me, for greater experimentation, I am encouraged that we're taking a thoughtful and a measured approach that allows us the observation that we need in order to turn back, step back, or move forward. Heaven forbid we get much, much worse and have to be in a shutdown manner again. But as I think about the fact that we do need to be prepared, whether it happens or not, it is so helpful to see this work moving forward. You know, we do want to practice and to be sure that whether we have Delta or Lambda, which Commissioner Reinhardt and I learned about last night as variants occurring in this pandemic mode, that we are prepared. So that's really all I wanted to say. Thank you for the flexibility that you're designing, but the careful measures that you're putting in place to be sure that we're able to observe and to adjust as may be necessary as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I just wanted to raise one more point, and I know you know this, but it needs to be said out loud, is that as we're developing and designing to continue to work with our union representatives and our cultural employee groups, because even if, you know, they represent a larger collective that may or may not respond to the survey, and so that we're really engaging and working out what those details look like. So I just wanted to say that out loud.
Thank you.
Commissioner McDonough.
Thanks, Madam Chair. You know, I think everybody's done some really good, thorough work to this point to get to some recommendations. You know, I can be supportive of the recommendations. But what's going to be critical here is the voice that's missing, right? And that's the residents and the people we serve. You've done really good, thorough work, but that piece is not here yet, right? The only piece here is the anecdotal feedback we've gotten from our employees that feel like they're serving our residents better. And that's only from the ones that responded, right? It's not from the ones that didn't respond. So, you know, the work here moving forward as you move forward on your phased approach really needs to start collecting the voices and thoughts of the people that we're serving. And it has to be a part of the decision-making as we move forward on what we're hearing from the community and the people we serve.
Madam Chair, Commissioner McDonough, we'll put that as a follow-up for the team to specifically figure out how we can set up a process, and we'll bring that back as a specific piece to this discussion here, because it matters to all of us. We agree, and I just want to put that down now as a marker, like let's come back and talk about that some more, because ultimately it rises. Our outcome does not rise or fall on just how employees feel. It rises or falls based on how we serve the community we're here to serve.
Thank you. To wrap up, I mean, we've heard points about the complexity of this issue and the need for caution and the context of how this work and information has been gathered. I just want to say I really appreciate the willingness of our organization to try and fail, try and fail. And when it comes to learning, when I would train my staff on how to teach young children, I think it applies to learning in general, that we have to first know where we want to go. And we have this flexible workplace policy vision about transitioning and transforming our organization, aligning with residents first, incorporating service delivery, a strong and inclusive workplace. We know where we want to go. And you've laid out an idea and a start of how we get there. The survey and resurvey piece is about how are we actually getting there. And I don't believe in ever creating a policy and calling it done and putting it on a shelf. And that's not the impression I get from you or for the leadership in this organization. There's a sense of continuous quality improvement. And we had a workshop last week about community engagement, and I think the same thing. We have learned a lot of things through COVID. We're going to be making changes. There is not going to be one community engagement model because our community is consistently changing. The same is true for organization, and if we didn't incorporate this in the last survey, I would encourage incorporating demographic data. We know from our state demographer, we're seeing a decade, generation-long exodus of our boomers from the workplace, and that might change what our workplace needs to meet this vision. And so this should be part ongoing moving forward. It's not that we're going to have one workplace flexibility policy and that's going to last us for 40 years. It's going to continuously change, and rather than being afraid of pulling back a policy, we should just embrace right now that we are going to be a responsive organization, and we are willing to adapt and be flexible to make the environment what it needs to be for the people who are in the organization and the people we want to continue to have in this organization. So I appreciate that this approach really seems to respond to that idea of continuous quality improvement and recognize that we are a living, breathing organization and system, and there is no one size fits all for any person or time, period. With that, I will close the workshop unless you have anything to add.
Madam Chair, thanks for those words. Thanks again to the team for being here today. We did collect some demographic information voluntarily through the process, and I think that's actually one of the striking pieces I would just end on this about as organizations navigate it, what their composition looks like, and no demographic group is monolithic, and it's always important to note that we became a Gen X heavy workplace about 4 years ago. We are now millennials take up the second largest share of our workforce, followed by boomers third. That is different than counties around us. I don't know if it shapes this differently or not, quite frankly. I haven't had the time to sit back and really think it through, but it is this sign of the change that we talked about and the graying of the workforce and the turnover. It's been happening here, and we see it through our workforce statistics, and it's a conversation we need to continue to have through the budget cycle and beyond with this policy. So thank you all for the earnest and meaningful feedback today as we chart a path, and more to come in the weeks ahead.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.